Hello and welcome to MechLearn 360. In this video, I want to explain to you forces and the type of forces we have or we experience in mechanics. Alright, so a force represents the action of one body on another body. Now let's try to understand what an action is. So depending on the action of the force, a force may produce either external effect or internal effect. So what we are trying to say is that whenever I have a rigid body, then I'm looking at all the forces acting on the rigid body by other bodies, then I want to talk about external effects. However, if I have a rigid body and I'm looking at the forces which holds the particle together, then I'm looking at internal forces. Now, what happens is that forces which are external to a body, in other words, external forces, tends to create applied forces or reactive forces, or simply put, a reaction. So what we are trying to say is that forces which are external to a body can either be applied force on the body or a reaction force between the body and then other bodies. Now, as a matter of fact, the scope of internal forces and their effect is studied in mechanics of material, which is strength of materials. So we will not go deep into internal forces in this course. Now, what happens is that forces can also be classified as contact forces or body forces. So as the name suggests, a contact force is produced by direct physical contact. And so when I have a contact surface between two bodies, there is going to be a contact force. A typical example is reaction. Whenever two bodies are in contact, there is going to be a reaction force between the two bodies. However, we have what we call a body force. What is a body force? Body force is experienced by a body within a force field. So whenever a body is in a field, could be magnetic field, electric field, gravitational field, the body will experience a certain force. And so when a body is in a gravitational field, the body will experience weight. All right, so that is body force for you. So we can also classify forces as concentrated forces or distributed forces, depending on the area of contact of depending on the area of the contact force. So all what we are trying to say that forces which tend to be contact forces can be further classified as concentrated or distributed. All right. Now, basically, what we are trying to say is that when a force is concentrated, then it means that the force is just acting at a small area. And so all what we are trying to say is that when the dimensions of the area are very small compared with the other dimension of the body, then we may consider the force to be concentrated. However, a force can also be distributed. As a matter of fact, all forces are distributed forces in nature, because whenever two bodies are in contact, there is going to be an area of contact, as in the case of mechanical contact. Now, as a matter of fact, weight is, so the weight of a body is the force of gravitational attraction. In other words, the gravitational pull you feel, and this force is actually a distributed force over the volume. However, in all our analysis, we are going to assume that weight is actually a concentrated force which is acting through what we call the center of gravity. As a matter of fact, there is a whole video which I have done on centroids and center of gravity. So this is what we are talking about, external forces and internal forces. So if I am looking at the forces acting at A and B, then I want to talk about external forces. If I want to cut at C and look at what is happening, then I have internal forces. Now, this one is furthermore explained in mechanics of material, where we are looking at internal forces. So this is a contact force and a body force. The contact force is a force between these two. So this is the reaction generated here. And then I have two bodies, and then there is going to be gravitational force right here. So this is a body force. So this is what we are calling concentrated and distributed force. So P1 is concentrated at B, P2 is concentrated at C. However, I see a loading or a force which is actually distributed over the area. Okay, so that's the meaning of distributed force. Finally, let's look at reaction force and applied force. So I have a vehicle here being pulled by three gentlemen. So the action of the three gentlemen is what we are calling the applied force F here. So we are looking at the external force on this guy. Then I have R1. R1 is the reaction between the ground and then the wheels, because the ground is in contact with the wheels, so there's going to be what? A contact force, which is the reaction force. Now the weight of the body is assumed to be a concentrated force which is acting right here. However, the weight is distributed over the entire body, but we are just taking it to act at the center of gravity as a concentrated force. Similarly, have a wheel here and the ground here. Now, because this wheel and the ground is in contact, there's going to be a reaction force. And so these are the type of forces you are going to encounter in the study. Thank you very much for watching.